If you're a mid-level to C-suite leader who wants to own your growth and figure out your next small, brave move to achieve your leadership goals, you are in the right place. Welcome to the Small Brave Moves podcast, a weekly deep dive on how to be braver in leadership and in life for exceptional results. I'm your host, Nicole Bianchi, best-selling author, certified master executive coach, NSA certified speaking professional, chief bravery officer, and tough talk expert. If you're ready to become a better, braver, and more authentic leader, let's dive in. Welcome back to the Small Brave Moves podcast. This is the place where we explore the tiny acts of courage that really transform leadership, teams, and culture. And today we're talking about something that just sits at the heart of great leadership, and that's communication. So, not the polished corporate grind that you're probably used to. I'm talking about the conversations that leaders know they need to have, but keep putting off. Because here's the truth. The quality of your leadership is often determined by the conversations you're willing to have and how soon you're willing to have them. Not your title, not your strategy, not even your experience. It's your conversations. And more specifically, the ones you're avoiding. And avoiding conversations is expensive. So let me ask you something. When was the last time someone at work said something that meant one thing to them and something completely different to you? Maybe someone said, "Can I give you some feedback?" And suddenly your stomach did that somersault. Or someone said, "Let's table that." And you're wondering, do you mean until next Tuesday or until the end of time? Or someone says, "We're all aligned." And you're sitting there thinking, aligned on what planet? This happens. And this happens more than we realize. Not because people are bad communicators, but because we're often speaking different languages, even when we're using the same words. And when teams don't have a shared language for communication, things just get messy. People talk about each other instead of talk to each other. Feedback becomes threatening. Small issues turn into big ones and fast. And people start walking on eggshells, and leaders assume alignment that doesn't actually exist. So what's interesting is, before we go further, I want you to pause for just a second and think about your work right now. Is there a conversation you know you should be having, but you just keep pushing it off? Maybe it's with a team member. Maybe it's with your boss. Maybe it's with a peer. Or maybe it's with yourself. Most leaders don't avoid these conversations because they don't care. They avoid them because they're human. We worry about saying the wrong thing. We worry about damaging the relationship. And we worry about creating this tension. So instead, we just delay. Well, here's the leadership reality. The longer we wait to have the conversation, the heavier it becomes. And what could have been a 5-minute clarification turns into 6 months of just pure frustration. A small misalignment becomes a cultural problem. A coaching moment becomes a performance issue. And it's not because leaders are bad people. It's because the conversation just didn't happen soon enough. So over the years, both when I was leading transformation work inside Fortune 300 companies, and now as an executive coach and keynote speaker, I started noticing a pattern. Many of the leadership challenges organizations face aren't really about strategy. They're about communication avoidance. Almost every leadership challenge I was brought in to help with could have been traced back to one thing:
And that's a conversation that should have happened earlier. Let me give you a quick example of what I'm talking about. So, a few years ago, I was working with a leadership team inside of a large organization. On the surface, well, everything looked fine. But the meetings that they were having were tense, decisions were slow, people were polite but guarded. And after a few conversations, I discovered something really interesting. Two senior leaders on the team had been quietly frustrated with each other for months. Think about that, for months. And not because of anything dramatic, just small misunderstandings that were never addressed. Each assumed the other should know. Each vented privately, but neither had actually said anything directly. So we finally had the conversation in the room together. 20 minutes, and that's all it took. The tension dissolved, the room relaxed, and one of them said something I'll never forget. I wish we had just talked about this 6 months ago. And that's the cost of avoided conversations, which is why I created a framework called the 5 Tough Talks. It helps leaders understand the 5 types of brave conversations they must master to build aligned and high-performing teams. Think of it as a map for the conversations that matter most, because brave leadership is not about avoiding tension. It's about navigating it skillfully. So let's walk through the 5. The first tough talk is called How We Work. The how we work conversation is the conversation that most teams skip over. And it's the one that would actually prevent half their problems. And this is where leaders and teams align on the rules, routines, and rhythms of how they need to operate together. How should they communicate? How should they make decisions? How do they want to handle feedback or conflict? And what does accountability actually look like within our team or within each other? Without this conversation, teams are left guessing. Everyone's working hard, but often in slightly different directions. And sometimes organizations bring me in thinking, well, they need motivation. And what they actually need is alignment, because when a team finally sits down and says, let's talk about how we want to work together, it can actually reset the entire culture of the group. The second tough talk is the ask. And this is the conversation where you clearly request what you need: help, resources, support. Maybe it's clarity, recognition. You'd be amazed at how many leaders struggle with making an ask. I once coached a leader who was exhausted. Her team was overloaded, projects were behind, no surprise, and she kept telling herself, I should be able to handle this. And what's so fascinating about this is when we unpacked it, we realized something, and it was really clear. She hadn't actually asked for any help, not from her boss, not from her peers, and not from her team. So she was waiting for someone to notice. And if we're waiting for somebody to notice, then we might be waiting a long time. So we practiced one sentence, just one. And we said, I need to make an ask. That's simple. I need to make an ask. She said it in her next leadership team meeting. And her boss responded with, why didn't you just say something sooner? And that one sentence unlocked resources she had needed for months. Strong leaders don't carry everything alone. They know how to ask. The third tough talk is the what's going on conversation. And this conversation happens when you're noticing a shift. A shift, maybe somebody's behavior changes or their performance is changing, and something just feels off. Maybe it's between your relationship. You were in alignment, now you're out. And many leaders ignore this moment in hopes that it will just resolve itself. But great leaders lean into curiosity instead. One leader I worked with noticed a top performer suddenly pulling back. Deadlines were slipping, energy was dropping, and at first she assumed the employee was disengaging. But instead of jumping to conclusions, she asked one simple question. She said, "Hey, I've noticed a shift. Talk to me about what's going on here." The employee paused and said, "My dad was just diagnosed with cancer." Now think about that for a moment. The leader had assumed it was performance. And the reality was it was a personal crisis. And that conversation, it just changed everything. Workload shifted, support increased, especially during that time. And the employer said it was the moment that they knew their leader truly had their back. And that's the power of being curious, especially in the what's going on conversation. The fourth tough talk is being better. And this conversation happens when we're seeing a pattern be formed. Something needs to improve, and it needs to be addressed directly. But this conversation isn't about criticism. It's about growth. And it's about saying, I care enough about our work and our relationship to talk to you about how we can do this better. And finally, the toughest conversation of all, that's the moving on conversation. This is when something simply isn't working anymore at all. It's a role, maybe a project, maybe even a partnership or a relationship. And sometimes the bravest thing a leader can do is acknowledge that the path forward needs to change. Handled poorly, this conversation can damage trust. Handled well, it preserves dignity and clarity for you both. So now, here's the key insight. When teams get good at the first three conversations, the how we work, the ask, the what's going on, the last two become so much easier and far less frequent because problems are addressed long before they become crises. And that's the power of brave communication. But something else powerful happens when teams learn this framework, the 5 tough talks. They develop a shared language, and suddenly you hear things like, I need to make an ask, or I think we need a what's going on conversation together. Let's revisit our rules, routines, rhythms, our agreements, or I think it's time for a moving on conversation. What I love about this is, to outsiders, it might sound like code. And inside the team, it really creates clarity. It takes all the guesswork out. There's no tiptoeing, just honest communication. Today, I help organizations build this shared language in several ways. Sometimes it starts with a keynote that introduces leaders to the 5 Tough Talks framework. Then we go deeper with workshops where teams actually practice these conversations together. Many organizations use the 5 Tough Talks book and workbook to build these skills internally within their teams. And for executives navigating particularly high-stakes leadership challenges, we work together through one-on-one coaching to prepare for those conversations that matter the most. Because brave leaders don't avoid the tough conversations. They prepare for them. They practice them. They rehearse them. And then they lead them. Before we close, I want to ask you one question. What conversation have you been postponing that your leadership actually requires? Start there, because brave cultures aren't built in these big moments. They're built in conversations, one small brave move at a time. Thanks for joining me today. And if this episode resonated with you, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, share it with a fellow leader or team who might need this framework. I'm grateful for this work and grateful for you listening. Until next time, keep making those small, brave moves.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Small Brave Moves podcast. If you're wanting to take this work even deeper, I'm here to help. From engaging in inspirational keynote speeches to transformational coaching and workshops for leaders and teams, page-turning books, online courses, and enlightening leadership development retreats. There are so many ways that we can work together to take your leadership to the next level. For more information, check out the show notes, and let's do this together, one small brave move at a time. See you next week.